Just want to, if I may just ask this question. You talked about the dwindling revenues and what accrued to the state and how the states became incapacitated. Would it be right to say the governors were not thinking of other avenues of raising money besides IGR? Because you might say, hey, we were doing our internally generated revenues, but they're not enough for the projects. Were the governors not thinking of other avenues?
Now you insist on this mistake. Governors. That is not correct. You should talk about governments.
Okay, government.
Because unless you have evidence to the contrary, I speak on my honor that the federal government is just as broke and that they are borrowing, using CBN instruments, huge in trillions of naira to meet salaries. So what you should then ask me, why are governments, including federal government, not able to look inward beyond oil revenue? Now, part of the problem, talking about taxes, again, and I insist, and this can be proved, and in black and white, just day before yesterday, we had a report from the Office of the Accountant General. The federal government illegally granted waivers to various organizations running into hundreds of billions of naira that ought to flow to the federation account. Now, those are taxes. When the minister grant waiver for you to bring cement into the country, grant waiver for you to bring vegetable oil into the country, grant waiver for you to bring vehicles into the country, and when you look at the total sum, this is what you call taxes. Sometimes, even VAT, value-added tax, was illegally waived. How do you get taxes? Now, there are two kinds of taxes, direct and indirect tax. Personal income tax, which all of us in this room, we have no choice over it, is deducted by our paymaster once before your net gets to you. And indirect tax, which is VAT, royalties, import tax, when you spend quality of time looking at your tariff policies designed to protect your local industries as incentive and all of that, and discourage importation. All of those are sources of funding government. We must understand that in other climes, government does not live on rent from dollars, from oil money. Governments worldwide are run on taxes. Now, this last government is infamous for being the worst in terms of granting unexplained, huge source of money in the name of waivers. Can you believe that evil oil companies were granted so-called pioneer status? They set up a small vehicle, in the oil sector, give them certain transactions, give them so-called pioneer status, so that they are excused from paying taxes. And when your economy,
if I may come in here,
when you shield the key players, because we talk about federal government because of the way the federation is structured. These are federation assets. Federation means local government, state governments, and federal government. It is the state that makes the federal, but the federal government manages these things on behalf of the state.
Okay, what comes down to the state is the question.
Yeah.
Yes, the federal government manages the federation's assets, and
on behalf of the rest.
Yeah. And as you said, so far the last administration has mismanaged a substantial sum. But what the little that comes down to the state, how have those ones been managed?
Okay, now this is the contradiction. If my budget for personnel costs, as is the case now in Edo State, we try to keep our eye on our personnel costs by introducing modern information technology, computerize our payroll, do biometrics, weed away all kinds of abuses and stealing, which most people simplistically refer to as ghost workers. When you have eliminated all of that and ensure that no illegal employment takes place without proper procedures, our wage bill has come down to about slightly over 3 billion naira. And of course, our pension obligation is also rising. As people get old and they retire, you are dropping names from your payroll, you are increasing names in your pension requirement. So if my total obligation, pension, salaries is 4 billion, and I receive 2.5 billion, which means I need about 1.5 to balance my my budget to pay salaries. So what can I do? I have to look inward, which is what we are doing in Edo State, collect taxes, look at new areas.
How has that been for Edo State?
We made some progress, but not enough to compensate for the huge loss. In Edo, when I assumed duties on November 12, 2008, the locally generated revenue was 285 million naira a month. And out of that, because the then government chose to use so-called tax consultant, the tax consultant was entitled to a huge sum of 25% of whatever was collected. So when you net that from total accruals, the actual net locally generated revenue was around 250 million naira a month. We did quite some work. We worked with the commissioners. We looked inward. We had a seminar. I took all my ESCO members to Lagos. We had the benefit of drawing from Governor Fashola's experience, looking inward. And over 1 year, we were able to raise that to about 2.1 billion. Even today, we are up to date in salaries, in spite of the fact that the net we receive from Abuja
that is where we're coming.
is below.
You are up to date
so
in salaries.
We are able
Now you're getting...
In spite of the dwindling revenue.
In spite of you are up to date, Edo State is not owing salaries. And that's why Nyota and Chamberlain, they've been asking that, look, let's look at some of these states. If Edo State, once upon a time, you're not new there. It's a state that they would say is a civil service state.
Yeah.
Till date, they are not being owed salaries. What then happens to other states that are even far better than Edo State that are owing salaries? So we're saying, away from the dwindling revenue coming from the oil, how effective have they been, some of these ones, when it comes to being creative and looking inwards and also drawing from experience of other states that, like Lagos, you said you and your team were in Lagos to see how these taxes can be taken from some of those who were actually diverting them. So what can be done to some of these states that are still owing salaries as we speak?
Well, I think first thing is, we've all discussed this. It's not as if we are simply looking at getting more money in. We've also encouraged ourselves that we need to look inward and cut costs wherever we can. Because, for example, when people talk of personnel costs, it's not synonymous with salaries and wages. It's all about the costs of running the system, overhead, etc., etc. I believe every governor is looking inward to try to affect more costs. In addition, you want to look inward and see how you can collect actual taxes. But it requires huge political will. For example, in Edo State, I've had to have battles with, even people who are highly educated in the formal sector, federal government agencies, even some state agencies, including civil servants and
about paying their taxes.
Yeah, who think that before I got to Edo, they are paid 5%. I said no, Edo is not making a new personal income tax. There is a national personal income tax, which has nationwide application. And you find federal agencies, you find the top paid, you find professors refusing to pay salaries as provided for. Paying taxes as provided for in law. It was a huge battle. We've had to take several organizations to court. We have had to shut down a number of banks. Even the airport, I think on channels, if you play back sometime 2 years ago, the Benin airport was shut down because we compelled Nigeria fund to pay their taxes. And they felt that because we are a federal agency, we don't need to pay. As we speak, federal agencies, we have carried out due audit, are owing Edo State about 2.2 billion naira in personal income tax deducted but not remitted to Edo State government. So I imagine that some other states may be facing similar challenges. We have even taken them to court on this. We have obtained a court order to compel the federal government to remit to Edo State money deducted from federal employees who who reside in Edo State as provided for in law. So, two things here. First is that this process is not so easy. If you play back the story, you will find PDP has accused us of, for example, of introducing land use charge. We say, fine, if one man occupies 5,000 square meters in the city, in the GRA, for God's sake, you should pay. Another man occupies just 5,000 square, 50 square meters, 1,000 square meters. So we've come up with a new tax regime that empower government to collect land use charge in addition to tenement rates and other charges. But these things require a lot of effort. You have to take into consideration. Let me play back this for you. There is no question. We all can look inward and do something differently. That's what we are doing in Edo, and I'm sure there are a couple of other governments that have been. Just last week, Kwara State signed into law created a new revenue service. Okay. I saw that on television, which means every state is looking inward and see what we can do differently.
Let me also play this back for you, because you're up to date in salaries. But could you explain, because there's I think judiciary workers and some other local government employees, but this happens to be a latest one now. Here's what they're talking about, Your Excellency.